Hey everyone, this is Pete, and welcome back to Atari ST A to Z, a series of short playthroughs of Atari ST games, some which I grew up with and some which are new to me. Today is one of the former. Today we're taking a look at Screaming Wings, which was a 1987 release for Atari ST, developed and published by Red Rat Software. It was ostensibly a port of the 1986 Atari 8-bit version of the same name, but it's actually very different. While the Atari 8-bit version was a riff on Capcom's 1942, the Atari ST version used modern jet fighters instead. Also, the Atari 8-bit version was pretty well regarded, and the ST version was broadly hated by a lot of people. My brother absolutely despised this game when he reviewed it for Page 6 magazine, and ST Action magazine said that the game must surely be a nominee for the Golden Turkey Award. And yes, to my delight, I have a copy of this game right here. This is in a very sort of retro style packaging that you didn't see that often on the Atari ST. You tended to see this a bit more on the Atari 8-bit, this sort of wallet style presentation. To be fair, it's actually quite a good way of distributing games on floppy disk with manuals and so on, but it fell out of favour after the 8-bit era. So let's take a look at what we've got in there. We've got the floppy disk, obviously. We've got this here, which is the Atari Strike Force Pilot's License Class 1, where you can actually fill in your name, address, nationality and age if you want to. Some information about the enemy identification chart, which gives you an idea of quite how few enemies you will be facing in this game. There's a space for you to put in your high scores. There's some specifications and a cockpit diagram of the fighter you'll be piloting in the game. All of this is completely irrelevant because it's a top-down, vertically scrolling shoot 'em up. And then we have a single page of instructions, because this page over here is in German. So let's see what it says. With the Pratt & Whitney jet engines screaming at full power, your heavily armed jet fighter leaps from the runway, pulling 4 Gs and slamming you back against the padded seating. The sun is a dazzling blur high in the azure sky. Coming straight at you, tracer cannons blazing are the enemy. Defend your airbase, that's your orders. Kill or be killed. Your finger hovers over the fire button, sweat glistens on your face, but your throat is dry with panic. There's no room in this sky for cowards, and no turning back. The battle is starting! 2 ellipses and an exclamation mark. Attack enemy aircraft using a joystick. During the game you'll be able to pick up various pods to equip you with shields, drone, rapid fire and destructor bombs. Tap the spacebar to activate the equipment that doesn't come into use automatically. Music can be toggled on or off using the M key, and that's about it. Program copyright Colin Hughes 1987. Yeah, so that's about it. Like I say, this game is not very good from what I remember. Which is a shame because the Atari 8-bit version of Screaming Wings was really good. It was a really good version of 1942, basically, complete with loop-the-loops and flying a Lockheed Lightning and so on. But yeah, you'll see what the problem is with this one as soon as we start playing, I guess. So let's go play Screaming Wings.
Okay, here we are with Screaming Wings from Red Rat. I'm just going to take you through this whole load sequence, just to give you an idea of how long it takes to load, and give you a listen to this pleasant piece of music. That is the one thing I always really liked about this game. I mean, there's not a lot else to like about this game, to be perfectly honest, as you will see, but I did always like this little riff that played while it was loading. And in fact, I've never been someone who can actually play the guitar, but this riff is something that I know how to play on the guitar. Which is yeah, not anything to be especially proud of, I know, but, you know, it made me happy. The advantage is that no one knows that this game exists, and so I can just play that little riff and everyone goes, oh, that's really cool. And it's like, yeah, I made it up. No, I've never done that. To be honest, when I play that, no one ever seems to really notice what I'm doing. They just think it's some idiot who can't play the guitar picking out some simple little rhythm that isn't very difficult to play. And you will notice we're still loading. We are still loading. I guess what takes so long to load in this is the fact that most of the sound effects, not all of them, but most of them are digitized sound effects. So I guess it's just loading those into memory. You may have noticed on the initial loading screen that it said that the sound effects in this were produced by... Oh, hold on, one sec.
Red Rat Software proudly presents...
There you go. Yeah, you may have noticed that it said on the initial loading screen that all the sound effects in this were created using ST Replay. You might remember a few episodes back we looked at Quartet from Microdeal. Replay was another program by Microdeal that in fact was compatible with Quartet. So you could record your sound effects using Replay and then import them into Quartet to use as your sound banks, your sound files, your instrument sounds. And Replay was sort of the gold standard for digitised sound on both Atari 8-bit and Atari ST. Slight copyright infringing sample there. And you have to wait for this bloody 30% every time you play. But yeah, like I say, Replay was sort of the gold standard for digitised sound on both the Atari 8-bit and the Atari ST for a while. So initially on the Atari 8-bit it was released by a company called 2-Bit Systems, and then I think Microdeal sort of took over the trademark or something like that. I don't know if 2-Bit Systems folded or anything like that, but they certainly seemed to disappear off the face of the planet after a certain point. And from then on, Replay was very much a Microdeal thing. But Replay was really well regarded, and it had lots of different versions that released over the years. So there was Replay Professional, which did 16-bit sample sounds, which was quite uncommon at the time, as you can hear from the quality of these samples here. They're not very high quality, and so sort of 16-bit sound samples that were at what we now know as CD quality were very rare, largely because they took up so much space. So like you could fit like barely a second of CD quality audio onto a... No, that's probably not true, but you could certainly not fit very much CD quality 16-bit samples onto a floppy disk, and so yeah, they weren't terribly practical to use on the Atari ST, particularly if you wanted to use multiple samples for something like this, for something like a game, because you'd have to fit them all in memory.
Game over, man! Game over!
So you notice I'm not really talking a great deal about this game, because it's fairly self-explanatory, and it's not very good. It is a very bare-bones, vertically scrolling shoot-'em-up, in which you have a limited number of bullets on screen at once, in the fashion of old-school fixed shooters. The enemies move in fixed and admittedly learnable patterns, rather than just flinging themselves at you randomly. The main problem... Well, there's lots of problems with this game, but the main problem... There's two main problems that I see with this game. One is the fact that it uses... sort of the collision detection that we were used to in home computer games at the time, which was to do with overlapping pixels and color sprites. So collision detection in the early days of home computing was done by taking a look at a sprite and seeing if any part of that sprite was overlapping a particular color or another sprite or something like that. And that meant that the entire sprite was basically a hitbox, so any part of your craft touches something and it gets destroyed. If you've played any of the best shooters from over the years, you'll know that the best shooters are set up in such a way that only a tiny part of your craft is actually vulnerable. So usually the cockpit, or like a pulsating heart or a power core or something like that. And that means that you can sort of weave your way in and out of bullets and do these really thrilling sort of improbable combat situations that are really exciting to be part of. But that's not the case in this. Like your entire ship is vulnerable, your entire plane is vulnerable, and so if it so much as clips anything on the screen that isn't the background, it will be destroyed. Now the other big problem with this game, that is probably the most serious problem from a playability perspective, is that the bullets are so tiny, so pathetic, and so hard to see. They are little white boxes that are probably 4 pixels big. 2 by 2 square on a 320 by 200 screen. In white. And you're expected to be able to see those against the backdrop. And you'll notice that the backdrop makes quite frequent use of white. So, for example, in the waves on the ocean here, you'll notice that the bullets and the waves on the ocean are exactly the same colour. That's good, isn't it? That makes them nice and easy to see. Makes them very easy to avoid. No, it doesn't. Not at all. That is the biggest problem with this game. That, when combined with the collision detection, means that this game is nigh unplayable. Just because you can't see what you're doing. You can't see incoming threats. You can't. It's just not good. It's just not good at all. Which, like I say, is such a huge shame, because Screaming Wings on the Atari 8-bit was really, really good. And all anyone wanted from an Atari ST version was a port of that Atari 8-bit version. And so why they decided to do something completely different and vastly inferior, I have no idea. But that is indeed what they did. Now, to be fair, this does have a couple of nice ideas here and there. I like the drone thing. The fact that there are power-ups is interesting and unusual for the time. So I like that side of things, but the fact that it is nigh impossible to avoid bullets, that you can barely see them on screen, that a lot of these enemy formations come straight for you.
Good shooting.
Yeah, I've actually finished the first level. I'm not entirely sure if I've ever done that before. But there we go. So you get a bonus. And I've actually got an extra life as well. And then we continue on to the next stage, which, as you can see, is much the same as the first stage. Except we have the odd missile coming our way, as well as the planes. But the attack patterns are not especially imaginative. I'm pretty sure that these are actually the exact same attack patterns that are in the first stage, just with the occasional addition of those extra missiles. And obviously,
Game over, man. It's game over.
you got the background, which is just looping, basically. And that's about it, really. So like I say, this was a big disappointment to a lot of people. My brother was super disappointed in this when he reviewed it for page 6. And as I say, ST Action Magazine didn't think much of it. Fuck. ST Action Magazine didn't think much of it either. Firstly, because, as I said, the original Screaming Rings for Atari 8-bit was really good. It was basically the closest we got to an Atari 8-bit version of Capcom's 1942. I mean, it was a gratuitous rip-off of 1942 and wasn't even trying to hide that fact. But it was cool. It played really well. It had good graphics. It had good sound. It had interesting gameplay. And it worked really well as a shoot-'em-up. The second reason why people were super disappointed with this was the fact that it was by Red Rat Software. And Red Rat Software were known on the Atari 8-bit for releasing a lot of high-quality software. Not exclusively high-quality software. They released a fair few duffers. In their time. But for the most part, Red Rat Software was a sign of quality. Oh,
Game
penis.
over, man. It's game over.
Yeah, for the most part, Red Rat Software was a sign of quality. They put out some really good games on Atari 8-bit. There was stuff like Laserhawk, Hawk Quest, Crumble's Crisis, Space Lobsters, Screaming Wings. And I think this was one of their early forays into the ST market, and I think people were just expecting a lot better from them, given their history on the 8-bit platform. And I don't know if it just was the fact that the programmers who were working for them just didn't have the experience with the Atari ST that they had with the 8-bit, or if it was just that, I don't know, they just made some not very good games. Either way, this is the result.
Game over, man. Game over.
I've been very harsh on this game because it's not great. There are some things it does quite well, though. The scrolling is reasonable for the Atari ST, which is worth praising because the Atari ST is not terribly good at scrolling. And this isn't the smoothest scrolling you'll ever see, but for the Atari ST, it's actually pretty good. The fact that it's keeping this much action on the screen and not slowing down as well is worthy of note. Again, especially on the Atari ST. Getting a little bit slow down there where there's lots of planes going on, but for the most part, this is actually holding its performance together pretty well. Especially with the sampled sounds. Like, at the time this came out, a game that used exclusively digitized sounds on the ST was pretty rare. And so that side of things was cool. It was sort of a showcase for ST replay, but it was also a way for...
Game over, man.
It was also a way for developers and programmers to show off, because sort of putting in digitized sound was seen as something new and exciting, and I don't know if it was regarded as something that was difficult to do, but because I don't think it was, it's especially difficult to do if you use the right sort of drivewares and bits of software to actually talk to replay files. But and I remember that later on there were solutions like for the STOS programming language. STOS had its own sampler called STOS Maestro. And that came with some extensions for the STOS programming language that allowed STOS to call on digitized sound effects and that sort of thing. So I don't think using digitized sounds was necessarily difficult to implement on the Atari ST, but I think the main consideration was being able to squeeze everything into memory, keep the performance up, and sort of not compromise the other things that the piece of software was trying to do. The other thing is that the Atari ST...
Game over, man. Game over.
This is painful. This is genuinely painful. Yeah, the other thing is the Atari ST sound chip wasn't really built for samples. It was built for synthesizing waveforms that would create those distinctive, crunchy, crispy sound effects that we've heard in so many other games by this point. And yes, it was capable of producing samples by manipulating that sound chip to produce the appropriate waveforms that would recreate a digitized sound. That's how sampling works. But the reason digitized sound was much less common on the Atari ST than it was on the Amiga is that the Amiga's sound chip was built from the very beginning to focus pretty much entirely on digitized sounds. And that's why Amiga music is all based on sequence samples and has that distinctive sort of early 90s sound to it. Whereas Atari ST stuff very much has a chiptune sound to it. Right, we're going to play this once more because I don't think I can deal with any more of this. But yeah, I remember back in the day wanting to like this because I liked the Atari 8-bit version. I liked the fact that this was technically reasonably impressive for the time period in which it came out. It was an Atari ST game with sampled sounds. It had jet fighters in, and I was super into jet fighters at the time. But it was just a crashing disappointment in so many ways. And a lot of the mistakes it makes could just be so easily rectified. Like, those bullets just need to be a different colour. They don't necessarily even need to be any bigger. They just need to be clearer. A different colour that isn't being used elsewhere on the screen. The collision detection needs to be better. A bit more variety in the backgrounds. If that means you need to load a bit more background from disk between levels, fine. I'm okay with that. A bit of music would have been nice. But yeah. This is Screaming Wings for Atari ST for all its sins. Why? I think I'm done here. I mean, I've got the high score. So, you know, I've improved over the course of playing this series. That is just the same level, looping round and round, isn't it? Yeah. So, I guess you just play this until you just can't anymore. It's just wrapping around forever and ever and ever until you go completely insane. Oh no, we got some different terrain there. We had a desert level. I stand corrected. Maybe you can progress through and complete this. But would you want to? No, you wouldn't. That is pretty clear. Anyway, that's Screaming Wings for Atari ST from Red Rat Software. Not an essential part of the library by any means, but it's interesting that it exists in the form that it does anyway. So we'll leave that there for now. As always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again next time.